Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will present Budget 2020 at a time when the economy is going through a tough time. It is going to be no easy task to maintain fiscal deficit targets as well as find the means and measures to boost the economy. Improving the sentiment is also a big ask. So what should be on the Finance Minister's to-do list? What is the assessment of the current economic situation? To speak on all of this, I'm joined now by Arvind Panagariya, former Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog. Let me begin by just getting your assessment of the economic slowdown and all of the very worrying signs that are now emerging.
So let me give a little bit of background to this, Tamanna. This is the third slowdown that we have experienced since 1991. Soon after the reforms began, there was an 8-year period during which we grew at about 6.7 or 6.8% on average annually. And then I think, starting in the year 2000, 2001, the economy slowed down. And for the 3 years that followed, we had a growth rate of about 4% or so. Now, then the economy took off. We grew for 9 years at 8.2% per year. And we even weathered the global financial crisis during that period. But then I think, again in 2011-12, we began to slow down, 12, 13, 13, 14. So about another 3-year slowdown we have had. And especially 2 years, 12, 13 and 13, 14. And then we have grown for 5 years at 7.5%. And now we are slowing down again. So there is a background. We have been there before. It is not the first time. But what happens is that if you look at the past commentaries, they become so gloomy that the doomsday is here. But then it's forgotten. So I have a longer memory, as one ages, one's long-term memory survives a bit better than the short-term memory. So,
but this is one of those. Are you hoping this is one of those? Because if we're looking at historical perspective, what changed then that can change now? We are currently in a situation where, the world's economy is facing several tremors. India, even though relatively insulated, has its own set of problems where you have a credit crunch with investment slacking, consumption slowing down, unemployment, not looking very promising. So you have this sort of perfect storm. Is it really comparable in that sense to all of these other instances that you're talking about, sir?
In fact, if you compare it to the last one that we have had in 12, 13, 13, 14, that I'd say was a lot worse because, there's policy paralysis, there was environmental clearances were not happening, a lot of policy initiatives that were being taken actually were anti-growth. I could name quite several, but let me not go into those. So in the current one, on the other hand, the key feature is, the key factor that you have already pointed out is the weaknesses in the financial sector. I think the financial sector is in a bit of a turmoil. And we know what the reasons for that are. And the recovery of the financial sector, whenever there is this massive NPA problem, and this is a worldwide experience. We are not the only ones, and the last one being in the United States itself after the global financial crisis. Recovery tends to be slower. And also the recognition of this problem is delayed, which was true in our case also. That those of us who knew it at least as early as 2013, we tried to push. Actually, I was there in the government, and I tried to push very hard to get the action going, but it was difficult. I think the action began only in 2017. So that's a bit of a slow process, and then of course also spilled over into the non-finance banking companies, the NBFCs. So non-bank finance companies. So that might take another 6 months to a year to at least get to a reasonable kind of level, meaning the financial markets. And then the growth will resume. I also think that we have bottomed out now. Recovery will be a bit slow. So, it's not going to be a massive increase in growth rate in the second half of the current fiscal year. but we will see some turnaround, small turnaround, but some turnaround. And I think in the next fiscal year, 2021, we should get to about 6%. And then I would not be surprised at all if we jump back to about 8% or so.
Well, let's hope for that. If we've bottomed out, that is great. Now, let me address the big question, which is sticking to the fiscal deficit target of 3.3% in this year's budget. It's almost being spoken about as a given that this target will be breached because the government will have to ramp up spending and some measures to pull us out of this slowdown. Are you comfortable with that?
I have written and I stand by what I have said, that the fact that the economy has slowed down should not lead to increased profligacy, because our combined deficit of the public sector, once we also take account the states and the off-budget borrowing, is easily 8%. It could be touching, some estimates say that it touches about 9%. So that's very large. That's about as much as households are putting through the financial markets, meaning, household savings, financial savings are about that much, 8 to 9%. And so if the government borrows even more by increasing the deficit for the next year, it will translate into, in effect, nothing left for the private sector to borrow from the household savings. And that is very highly productive investment. So, it's not a good idea to crowd out what is your most productive investment. So, yes, for those reasons, I support staying with the current fiscal deficit, even if we choose not to kind of reduce it further. And I think there are alternative sources of revenue which would be more efficiency enhancing, to which the government can resort.
Former Economic Secretary S.C. Garg has said recently, and he appeared on the show, and he claimed that the actual fiscal deficit even last year was about a percentage higher. There have been some estimates, one of them from Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, that the actual GDP growth is perhaps 2% lower. Credibility of data has become a huge talk point. Right now, I know we're talking about the slowdown and what the government should do, but how important is it for India to quickly restore the credibility of the data we put out?
Look, Tamanna, this lack of credibility is bouncing around in a specific echo chamber. I don't see the investors buying that at all. Investors do trust the data, and look at the foreign investment. Even in the slowdown phase, which is the first half of the current fiscal year, your foreign investment was up about 15% over the corresponding period in the preceding year. So I don't think your investors are actually paying much attention to what all of you are saying about the credibility of the data, and particularly this kind of nonsensical claim of growth rate being 2 or 3 percentage points lower. I mean, where was the economic advisor when he was writing all these economic surveys saying that we were in a sweet spot? So I'm sort of, I don't understand those claims at all, actually, when I see this in the light of what was written in those days in the economic survey. So, that part of it, I disagree. Investment, I think, even in the official data, does show slowdown, as does everything else. When you grow on a quarterly, for the particular quarter, when you grow at 4.5%, and then clearly the growth rate of all the variables like consumption, investment, etc., will slow down, and that has happened. We see that. But the government has responded, in fact, with a number of different actions. There's always a lag in response. And so I'm not so worried, at least the government has responded in the way it should have responded. So I would patiently wait a little bit more.
Wait how long? Wait how long, and what more would you like to see from Budget 2020? Like you said, there have been, some significant announcements. The corporate rate tax being cut down is one of them. And right now, everyone's focus seems to be on a way to revive consumption. Cutting income taxes is one way which is being suggested and spoken about. Another is increasing, transfers to rural India through schemes like Manrega or PM Kisan, etc. Do you think that that should be the focus right now for the government?
Well, I have suggested actually, and I would repeat that the reform that was done in the corporate tax area, we should also do in the personal income tax area. And so I have said, bring the personal income tax rate to 22%, commit to it over a 3-year period, and upfront in this year, bring it down by 3 percentage points, and then remaining 5 you divide between the following 2 years, and then end all the exemptions. I think that is very important to me. In some sense, the bringing down the tax rate is a way to then go in and say that, look, I'm going to end all the exemptions. There's so many tax disputes happen, so much uncertainty that arises on account of these things. We can just put an end to all that. Taxpayers' mind will be at rest also, and their incentive to do productive work will rise too. So I think that's something we ought to do.
What can be the priority over here? If you were to list the top 2-3 things that Nirmala Sitharaman needs to do, especially in terms of a messaging to corporate India, do you think that that is something which can be focused on, and what would be your advice there?
No, so I think this is exactly the crux of the matter, that rather than now engage in all kinds of short-term measures, which anyway will generate response only with a lag, I would say stay course with the structural reforms, reforms that one needs to do in the longer run in any case, and that will send a fantastic signal. I think it's the signaling which you need to give to the private sector. And so on that front, I think there are a number of things that the finance minister could do. We already talked about personal income taxation, full simplification. Also, the administration of taxes have to be improved so that the tax collection improves. Now, at the same time, the government now ought to go on a very aggressive program of privatization. And there are 2 ways to do it. One is, of course, the privatization of public sector enterprises. A lot of these enterprises are already listed. All you have to do is, sell these stocks on the stock market. That's not so hard, but let the stake come below 50% and let a private board run these companies. So large number of companies ought to be privatized in that way. Second, I think this is asset monetization, which is important. This is about, taking roads, bridges, ports, airports, etc., which have already been built, including even the electric transmission lines. Give it in the private hands on a lease, long-term lease, which will generate a lot of revenue upfront for the government. And that also, again, will help raise the efficiency. I would also announce actually in the budget to give the signal that the government actually is going to be very bold, that the public sector banks will be put up for privatization. They need not put out at this stage the entire program, how they will plan to do it, but at least put it on the table so that a committee is appointed, with the mandate to come back and report within 3 months, some approximate roadmap to proceed in that area. Because at the end of the day, the government doesn't need 12 banks, and history has shown that year after year or time and again, we see these NPAs accumulating in the public sector banks. Now, if you take the last 25-year history.
It's not just the public sector banks right now. It's not just the public sector banks right now, though.
No, in fact, it is the public sector banks actually. If you look at the history of 25 years, the government has not spent a single rupee on bailing out or on recapitalizing the private sector banks. Even in this boot, again, just alone in this boot actually, and there have been past recapitalizations also, but even in the current one, 2.1 trillion rupees have been actually, this is more than what you spend on your entire Food Security Act, has been given to the public sector banks to recapitalize them. So, and in fact, if you look at the history of the credit slowdown, that it impacts a hell of a lot more the public sector banks than the private sector banks. the credit expansion of the private sector banks, in fact, has held up a lot better.
Interesting aspects there. Thank you so much, Mr. Panagariya, for speaking with us in the run-up to the budget. We hope to chat with you once again after the 1st of Feb and look at what your take is once those announcements have been made. Thank you so much for joining us.